So as promised, we are starting the series of discussing how parental estrangement can be impacted by fathers, uncles, brothers, nephews, the man factor, right? The male factor in parental estrangement. And if this is your first time here, parental estrangement is what is mostly trending online as no contact. It's when a family member, either an adult child or the parent can choose it as well, chooses not to have any contact with their parent or their child, okay? And estrangement happens with caregivers, okay? Caretakers. We can be here all night talking about the many ways in which estrangement can happen. In this case, and in this instance, we're talking about parental estrangement. And one of the many root causes of parental estrangement, okay? And so we're gonna be investigating a lot of things that I researched. I'm a Gen Xer, let me say that. So I grew up at a period, I'm a 69 Gen Xer, to make that clear. So I got to see culture shifts, many of them, okay? As many of us who are in that age group for Gen Xers, we got to see the cultural shift. We were called the feral children, right? The first latchkey kids, the first children that our parents had to leave the home, and two-income families came into existence where now the mother and the father were working out of the home, and also the divorce rate skyrocketed during our generation as well, okay? And so with that information and that knowledge that, things have shifted greatly. They've changed a lot. And it's one of the things that drives the culture wars between Gen Xers and other generations after them, right? The fact that we were considered the unemotional generation, that we didn't connect well with our children or with others, and that we were loners, and that we found comfort in being able to handle our problems on our own, right? For many of us, therapy may have been an option and may have been something that our parents chose. For me, we had therapy in our family, okay? But for some families, therapy was not an option. So a lot of toxic generational patterns were passed down through the Gen Xers into future generations, okay? And so one of the things I'd like to share with you and that I want you to explore is the impact of the shift of how the woman was viewed, how mothers were viewed, okay? And how that shift happened so drastically, okay? We had an era of music, of empowering for women. I think Blondie was one. We had Salt and Pepper, right? And so there's a vast array of music shifts where women were being empowered, right? And so we saw that shift then turn into the music and movies and other media. There was a shift in that. So now we have the Motley Crue. I wrote it up here. We have the Iron Maiden with Charlotte the Harlot, okay? That's a song that was out in 1980. And then we have Me So Horny, and that was the Two Live Crew in 1989, okay? And then we had the movies. In 1991 was Little Man Tate, right? Another shift is coming. And then in 1992, we had Bebe's Kids, okay? So I'm gonna come back to that later. But today's topic that we're discussing is societal and technological shifts, their roles in the change of family hierarchies, including no contact, and the adoption of chosen families. That's the whole title of this series for the month of August, that we'll be jumping in and exploring ways in which cultural shifts have impacted the increase in parental estrangement culture, okay, or parental estrangement situations. I don't know any other way to put it. And so this week we're talking about modern misogyny's role in parental estrangement. So, before I start, this information that I'm sharing is for informational purposes, okay? This is my view with what I've researched and with my personal experience as a mother who was estranged from her adult children, okay? I was estranged from my sons, and we had to fight hard for our family to become healed and cohesive, all right? And so I wanted to start off with talking about something that is, if you're a Gen Xer and you were a parent to teenagers during this time, you may also remember the shift, okay? And that is when MySpace showed up, okay? MySpace was, I think, Tom Anderson, MySpace. You'll have to look that one up. I didn't write that down, but I remember Tom. You can be friends with Tom, okay? So MySpace was the first time that there was a social media tool that artists, musicians could have direct access to their fan base. And from there, it grew into, the users having their own profile, sharing their likes and music, and talking and chatting amongst themselves to other users and what have you. I remember this vividly because I had 3 teenage boys at the time, and they were heavily into MySpace, and we were not prepared, okay? I'll just say that. And so it started, MySpace started in January of 2004. It launched on the web November of 2004. And by the end of that year, it had 5 million users. Okay? So we're talking about young people who were the first to actually, my generation was the first to have computers in school, because I took a IBM Lexowriter class, which was for administrative stuff. It was typing, letters, things like that. So I remember being trained on an IBM Lexowriter in high school. Okay, so we were the first generations who had computers in the classroom, right? But our children were the first generation to have social media, okay? And so that happened. January 2004 was MySpace, and followed up by that, MySpace went live August 1st, 2003, but it went live on the web on January 2004. So shortly after that, Facebook followed, and February 4th, 2004. And they went live by June 2004, and they had 250,000 students at the time, okay, by the end of 2004. So it says by the end of 2004, they had 1 million active users. Because as we know from the movie, it started on the campus, and then from then it was opened up. And I remember my children with that as well. What I also remember is my children going from, being these little people who had lots of curiosity about the world, did lots of reading. I was a parent who was not big on television. They had a library of encyclopedias, and I was big on monitoring TV time. And even on the computer, there was a limit on the amount of time that they could be on the computer, because it was 4 of them. I had at the time 3 boys and one girl, and they had to share the computer, okay? And so I can remember a shift in my home where my children weren't coming home, straight home from school. I remember my son, me finding out that he had been leaving school with his friends and driving 2 hours away to go to the beach with friends that they were all family members of his friends. They were going to their beach home and hanging out at the beach all day. And I know that's not uncommon, because that's happened through many generations, kids playing hooky from school, okay? But I'm just telling you where I noticed the shift in my home, and I was not aware of what it was. It just seemed like one day I woke up and I had a different set of children that were not honoring the rules that we had in the house before, okay? And so I remember being home one day and sitting down talking with the kids, and they wanted to show me something. We want to show you something that's really cool. And so they showed me, and at this time we had, I forget what it was called, but Apple had a little device that everybody was using, and so the kids wanted them. I can't remember what it was called. I can't remember, but they listened to music on it. And so I didn't have a problem with that, because I love music and I wanted I shared music with my children, right? And so they showed me MySpace, and they showed me how cool it was that they could talk to their artists, their favorite artists, and they would answer them back and all that, right? So no harm, no foul, right? We grew up in the MTV generation. At one point, there were phone numbers. You had to pay for it, but there were ways for you to call in and have interactive TV. We were the first, I think, to have interactive TV where we could call in and talk with our artists, or get interview questions. I remember 1580 K-Day when I was in junior high school was a radio station out in Los Angeles, California. And we could call in and do requests, and special times they would bring in certain artists, and if you get it through, you're able to ask them questions and they talk to you, right? So why would I think that there was anything different when it was being done on the computer, right? We're forward thinking at that time. We're thinking, okay, well, our children are having a good time, and that's okay, as long as I don't let them on there and they just spend all their time, goofing around, then this is a good thing, right? And so I remember just before, I think my oldest son was going to the 12th grade, and we were moving out of state. And that's when I started noticing the drama that was coming along with it. He'd taken a girl out for Valentine's Day, and a girl that he had as an ex-girlfriend, she gave him a teddy bear, and he given it as a gift to the other young lady. And there was pictures that were online that the first young lady had taken, and it was just a big deal, right? And it blew up, and it was children everywhere discussing this online when he came in to tell me, hey, look at this. This is not, I don't know what's happening, but look at what's going on. And I'm watching, and it's children from everywhere, other high schools in our area and all that, talking about it. And so it was a big deal at the high school, right? And so you don't think anything of it. Children go through these phases, and you want to teach your children to be good people, not to be dishonest, not to, take something from someone else, especially an ex-girlfriend, and give it to the new girlfriend. And, you teach them this, but these are children. And so that may have or should have been an indicator. But like I said, we didn't know, right? This was an innocent social tool for children to talk with their friends at the high school. And I had pen pals when I was in elementary. We used to write letters back and forth, and they were cities away, right? I lived in Los Angeles. My pen pal was I was in the 3rd grade. She was in the 3rd grade, and she lived in Tarzana, okay? So I didn't see anything wrong with that. But that's when I noticed a cultural shift where my children were talking back more, right? There's some other things I will be sharing in my book that I've already shared in my book. I'm that I'll come back to that. But that's when I noticed a cultural shift, and it started to spiral. There were arguments between me and the children about them getting up in the middle of the night and going to get onto the computer, the PC. And it was getting to the point where I was taking the cord out of it and taking it with me in the room and locking my door so they didn't have access to it when I wasn't home. Or I was unplugging the I forget what we called it at that time, the internet. We just called it unplugging the internet. So I was unplugging anything that gave them access being unmonitored, right? And so that in itself is when I started noticing a shift, okay? And I'll be covering some more in this series about how social media, in my opinion, has played a huge role in how groupthink happens, herd mentality happens, and how whole culture shifts happen, right? We've seen it. It drives fashion, it drives music, it drives movies, it drives trends, okay? And so how does modern misogyny play into that, right? So I'm not a sociologist, but my belief is at the time I was a single mother, and I was a single divorced mom for 17 years. I raised my boys by myself. I got married, my second marriage, and we're still together. We've been together almost 20 years. And so when he came in, we raised the children together, okay? We had 5 children then, 1 from his first marriage and 4 from my first marriage and a long-term relationship for my daughter. And so before my second marriage, I was the sole breadwinner. So a lot of my time was spent on the road because I worked 2 hours away. Living in California, that was not uncommon. Affordable and safe housing was normally quite a ways away from where you worked. When I was going to school, that meant that there was more time that I was away from home. And so all of this time is happening where there is not adult supervision in the home. Now, what's very common about that for us in the Gen X generation is many of us found ourselves at home letting ourselves, that's why we were called the latchkey kids, right? And so why would we think that there was something different, or why would that be any different for us to have our children at home? Daycare was expensive, right? Just having other families that were in your community, many of their parents had to work and they were home alone. My children were no different. Many of their friends were coming home and letting themselves in, but the majority of their friends, we lived in Temecula, California, and the community we lived in was predominantly white families, and some were one-income households where the dad worked and the mom stayed home, was a stay-at-home mom, and then there were other families that there were 2 parents working, okay? And so you kind of see the dynamic there where to live within that community, I needed to make a substantial amount of money. In order to do that, that meant I worked a lot of overtime. That meant, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time on the road, 2 hours away, one way to my job. And so when we look at that, just at the foundation of this, we look at the policies that are in place that make it easy for childcare not to be affordable, right? I can go through a whole timeline and a whole list of reasons of why there are so many single parents during that time in that time, and how there were not resources readily available for everyone. Okay. And so for in this example that I'm using, for how there is a cultural shift that is brought on by two male founders, okay? Two male founders. We have the cultural shift that I speak about, where music and movie and media, and I don't know how many of you remember, but we had a lot of magazines. The Inquiring Minds Want to Know, I think it was. So we had our own tabloids. There was this huge shift in how women were framed, and the respect that women received, and the respect that their single mothers were framed as broken, not, something had to go wrong, and it had to be the woman's fault. It had to be her that was the reason that things didn't go right. Because what is the first thing people say when children are acting out? Where's your mother? Right? Rarely that you hear, where's your father? Okay, so the bulk of the responsibility of the rearing of the children's behavior, that fell on the lap of the woman. While at the same time, as I'm sharing with you, we see a switch in the way that music is going, and it happened long before then. We saw a shift, because going back as far as Elvis Presley and Chuck Taylor, and a lot of all of the rock and music before rap that came, rock bands and heavy metal bands and pop and what have you, back in American Bandstand times, we started to see the shift in the music, right? What I'm talking about is during our lifetime, during the Gen Xers' lifetime, for when we were younger, watching the cultural shifts. So you see, I use 1980, we had Charlotte the Harlot, and that was by Iron Maiden. We had 1989, almost 10 years later, Me So Horny, and that was Two Live Crew. And it had gotten so graphic that there were, and I'm not here to wag my finger at who's right and who's wrong, but we need to be honest about how cultural shifts impact families, okay? And so we see that there's a shift, and it's happening fast, right? We're seeing women having the music of empowerment, and now there's something that's coming that's going to combat it, okay? So as we see women having empowerment music and standing up for themselves, and I Am Woman, and we're seeing more positive, we're also seeing a shift in the music that is now more male dominated, right? And then now it's more about women are not good people. Women are whores. Women are, whatever negative sexual connotations they can put on women, it was showing up in music and media. Then we see the shift in how, and we've always known this, because this wasn't just in 1991, 1992, where I'm showing you the contrast between Little Man Tate, which is a single white mom with a child that is a brilliant child or has a high IQ, and she's concerned about his well-being. We have now Bebe's Kids comes out, and now there's this new shift again to, this mother lives in the projects. She doesn't change the baby's diapers. The children she's a single mom, and there's this guy that's coming along that's going to save the family, right? Not giving any credit to the fact that in order to have the children survive, be nurtured, the mother is not in a position where, for whatever reason, and we can go tit for tat and talking about systemic and structural systems and how that caused a lot of suffering. I happen to be someone who grew up in Watts, California, South Central Watts, California. So we were one main street from Watts. So I'd say Watts, California, because most of the time we did anything in the community, shopping or what have you, we were going into Watts. And that's where we went to the park and had friends and what have you. And so I can talk to you about being at ground zero with the crack epidemic. Okay? So we don't want to talk about, we don't want to go tit for tat back and forth with that, because I have so much to say. I have so much to share about how that cultural shift left a lasting impact on our communities that just echoed through generations. Okay? And my family, the people behind me, aunties and uncles and cousins and what have you, how that impacted our family in a way that it impacted a lot of families, okay? And so where you're seeing that cultural shift in the framing of Black women, right? Women in general, but we start seeing now Black women being objectified more, right? The rap music is leaning more and more towards bitches and hoes and women ain't this and shake it that and do this and the other, right? And so we start seeing that. So with that being part of how young people engage and socialize, music being a big part of that, now we have social media where that music is being directly fed and brought to the children, right? They're able to, talk with the artists that they meet. Now, children who don't have as much monitoring or supervision are there. And not only that, we then had an influx of people who wanted to drive more business to certain things and start being able to reach the children directly. Oh, well, look at this new device. You want this new device. And with that came more access to children from adults, okay? More children being privy to conversations online that were not age appropriate. And the parents are none the wiser because none of us knew. None of us knew. There was no reason, as I mentioned. We'd all gone through a period where we were able to have interactive phone calls with our artists on our MTV and what have you, right? And so why would we think any different, that was any different for the children, right? And so as you get further and further into diving into how that whole culture of the family is beginning to shift, right? We're going from people taking family pictures on Facebook. I know you can remember everybody sharing, oh, we had a birthday party for my 2-year-old and this is that. children sharing pictures of their science projects and their teachers, even online, laughing and talking and showing the children and showing that how they're learning and what they're learning. And this is being broadcast so parents can see and others can see how great this school is, right? Nowhere were there safeguards being put in place until later when we started seeing the impact of children of adults who don't mean well, having access to children, of children being able to get access to information online now that was not being monitored, right? And the parents are nowhere near aware of what's being shared or what's being accessed. I will be honest with you, I don't think we really started understanding how impactful these social media sites were at that time until we were well into the 2000s. That's just, I don't know that is factual. I didn't do the research. I'm just saying that's when I started really paying attention to, wait a minute, they don't need this kind of access. Okay? And so how do we link that to modern misogyny, right? What are the greatest drivers of our economy? A lot of it is, and it's capitalism, but a lot of it is products, more music and movies and all of that. Who are most likely, more often than not, in charge of those companies? If you look at the ratio of men to women in those upper echelons of those companies, it's predominantly male and predominantly white male. Okay? Yes, we had women getting into corporate jobs and becoming responsible for marketing and what have you. But that wasn't the case at that time. There was a very small number of women who were in positions at that time of making those huge decisions about what is driving the economy. You understand? The belief systems of how women were viewed were then being challenged because now there were more women going to school, more women being educated, more women owning their own homes, buying their own homes. I don't know if you know this, but until the late 1970s, a woman couldn't buy a house by herself. Okay? 1970s. And so a lot of this was male driven. Male driven. Okay? And it was shaped by people who did not have the same values, the same belief systems that the people who they were impacting did. Okay? And so I'm going to go more into this. This is just a rough overview of what I'll be sharing in this series. Okay? I'll be breaking it down more. I'll have more graphics. I'll have I couldn't find another black dry erase marker, so I used my blue, and it didn't come out too good. So I'll be having visual aids that are much more effective and much more clear as we go into this series. But I wanted to talk about how a male-dominated industry drove a lot of what would become a new social norm, okay? And how the shifting of how women were viewed in order to put women back in their place, okay? Put women back in their place because we had more women going into the military. We had women in spaces that were predominantly male or male-dominated industries, okay? And so there was this rush to humble women and to remind them that we are the stronger ones and we run this thing and we need you to fall in place, okay? And a lot of that drove how information, how industries were impacted, fashion, social media, going back to where I said we had, instead of the gossip blogs that are on social media now, we had what was called, what were they called? They called them trash. I can't remember vividly. I'll have to look it up. But we had the magazines, and that's when the paparazzi started, right around the 90s, because everybody wanted to know where everyone was, who were famous and what have you, and they'd follow them around with these cameras, and we went through a period where paparazzi were racing through the streets back home in California and trying to catch, people. Look at who were in charge of those companies, okay? I want you to pay attention to who was in charge of the companies that were driving the social shifts. We went from the Esquire and Inquiring Minds Want to Know, or whatever the other ones were, I don't know if Esquire was a gossip magazine. I think it was another lifestyle magazine. But the gossip blogs and the gossip magazines that you'd see in line at the grocery store, were those headed by women? Were those founded by women? I don't think they were. And in my experience, when I went backwards and started looking at how they began, I don't mean that they were never started by women and that women never had gossip blogs or what have you. But the majority of the tools that were being used to shift culture in the most pivotal and the most pivotal times in our generation as Gen Xers and as parents, those were headed by modern men. Okay? And so do your own research. I love to have conversations, and I don't mind being corrected if I give some wrong information. So feel free to put your comments down below, and let's talk about it. I'll see you again next Monday, and I'll have up the topic for Monday's discussion on Friday of this week, which would be the 9th. Okay? Thank you so much if you've watched this all the way to the end, and I'll see you on next Monday.